Today we'll be discussing genetics and different diseases and disorders linked to genetics. Genetics. Everyone is born with 46 chromosomes. 23 of these are from your mom, and the other 23 are from your dad. Sex cells undergo a process called meiosis, where the result is 4 daughter cells, each with half the amount of chromosomes as their parent cell. During meiosis, there is a stage called crossing over, in which the genetic information is swapped between the chromosomes, and this leads to genetic variation. So as you can see here, you start out and you end up with 4 different genetic compositions of haploid cells. A chromosome is a thread-like structure of nucleic acids and proteins. Their job is to carry genetic information and then pass that genetic material from the parent to the child. What is DNA? DNA is the carrier of the genetic information. Each person's DNA holds the codes and information that gives a person a particular physical trait. DNA is composed of 1 phosphate, a sugar called deoxyribose, and 4 nitrogen bases. As you can tell, the DNA is wrapped in a double helix, which gives it its twisted ladder-like structure. And then it has the 4 different nitrogen bases. Adenine and thymine are always paired up together, just like G and C are. And they make up the rungs of the ladder, which is held together by hydrogen bonds. DNA sequences. The DNA sequence of a gene determines the amino acid sequence that the protein encodes. So your DNA sequence is read in groups of 3, and the 3 is called a codon. Each codon specifies for a specific protein that your body will make. However, when DNA is replicated or translated, mutations can occur. A mutation is a slight error in the copying, so if it doesn't copy correctly, an A doesn't become a T, like an A becomes a G, then you have a mutation. There are different types of mutations, such as frameshift mutations, deletions, insertions, missense mutations, and nonsense mutations. A frameshift mutation is when you have an addition or subtraction of a protein which shifts the grouping of your codons. And this messes up all the amino acid sequences by shifting what protein will be made. Next, a deletion is a change in the number of DNA with removing a DNA base. And insertion is the change of a DNA number of bases by adding an additional DNA base. A missense mutation is a change in one DNA base pair through a substitution. So it doesn't mess up the whole order of your DNA sequence, just one specific protein. And then a nonsense mutation is the same way where it just substitutes out one base pair, but this base pair causes it to have a premature stop, and so your cell prematurely stops making the protein, and that causes later problems. So the effect of mutations in people's lives. There's a disease called sickle cell anemia, which is genetic and common among people with African descent. Someone with sickle cell anemia has a sickle cell shaped, and this cell cannot hold efficient amounts of oxygen. Sickle cell anemia is a result of a point mutation, or a change of just one nucleotide in the gene for hemoglobin, which is responsible for carrying oxygen in our red blood cells. And so this causes the red blood cell to distort into the sickle shape. A virus enters the cell of another organism and then multiplies within that cell. The virus adds its own DNA into the host DNA, and then when our cells reproduce, we are also reproducing and spreading the virus's bad DNA. So there are 2 different types of viruses. You have your prokaryotic virus, which has 2 different life cycles. It has a lytic life cycle in which the virus enters the cell, hijacks it, and then destroys the cell. And then the lysogenic life cycle, where it enters the cell but does not destroy the cell. And then you have your eukaryotic virus, which is more diverse and also contains DNA and RNA in either a double or single strand, and is also covered by a lipid envelope, which makes them able to live longer. So here's an example where it has like the envelope and its DNA inside. And this is just one of the basic kind of structures that a virus can look like. So one disorder we have is diabetes, which can be caused through a genetic predisposition, or it can be caused by a virus. Diabetes is defined as a disease in which the body's inability to produce or respond to insulin, resulting in elevated blood sugar glucose levels. Glucose is just a fancy word for saying sugar. Your body's normal pH is somewhere between 7.35 and 7.45. Someone with diabetes can have a pH lower than 7.35, which would mean they're in a state of ketoacidosis and they're very acidic. Your glucose levels should be somewhere between 80 and 120, depending on age. And a person with diabetes will have numbers ranging 200 plus. Your A1C is like your 3-month kind of the memory of your red blood cells, kind of how much sugar is in your blood cells. A normal person would have somewhere between 5 and 6, and a lot of people when they're diagnosed have like A1Cs at like 14, so it's very dangerous. Many people ask what's the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. The difference is people with type 1 diabetes, their pancreas does not produce insulin, and so they have to have artificial insulin in order to be able to utilize the glucose that they get in their food. While type 2 diabetics, their pancreas does produce insulin, but their body does not know how to respond to that insulin, and so they are built up this thing called insulin resistance. Causes of type 1 diabetes. It is commonly known as a genetic autoimmune disease. Many people who have type 1 diabetes have a family history of people with type 1 diabetes, and then their children will be predisposed to also developing type 1 diabetes. In some experiments, scientists have followed relatives of family, and they have found that many of those who later got diabetes in their life had autoantibodies in their bloodstream from years before. So antibodies are proteins that destroy bacteria or viruses. So it's our body's natural way of defending and protecting ourselves from foreign or bad stuff. These autoantibodies, however, are antibodies that have gone bad. And instead of protecting us from foreign things that come into our bloodstream, they attacked our own tissues. So people with type 1 diabetes, they had autoantibodies that attacked the cells of the pancreas, and then therefore their pancreas can no longer produce insulin. However, they have also found out that type 1 diabetes can be triggered by environmental factors and also by viruses. The rubella virus has been suggested to be one of the causes of type 1 diabetes, but there's been no statistical evidence to fully back this theory yet. So there's a lot of research that can still be done. Some symptoms of diabetes. Excessive thirst is kind of the main big one. This is explained because water is being pulled out of your kidneys in order to dilute the high levels of glucose and sugar in your bloodstream. So that's why many people actually suffer from kidney failure and then later have to go on dialysis. So with frequent thirst comes frequent need to urinate. So along with being thirsty all the time, you're trying to drink more water to keep up with that. You're also putting so much stress on your kidneys, and so you're not filtering out all the sugar like you normally would. So a lot of it is just going out through your urine, and as the sugar is leaving, it is also pulling extra water out of your tissues and also your kidney and just wherever it can get that extra water out. So you're urinating more than you're losing more water than you're taking in. Excessive hunger is also a side effect. It is due to a lack of insulin in the body that cannot convert your food into energy. So even though you're eating, your body is not properly turning that food into energy. because of the lack of insulin. And so then you are more hungry because you need that energy. Weight loss goes along with that. If you are not able to store glucose as sugar into fats, then people have the trouble of losing weight because they are exercising and they're not storing any of that extra sugar to use as fat, and they're breaking down the fats when they are having like a low blood sugar. They're breaking down fats in their body, and so they get weight loss. Blurred vision is when you have high levels of glucose in your bloodstream. The lenses of your eyes actually swell and it changes your eye shape, as well as the nerve endings in your eye there's so much stress on them that it causes them to, like diabetic nerve pain is when your nerve endings are not properly functioning because of that stress. And this can also long-term lead to blindness in your eyes and also like loss of limbs. And extreme fatigue kind of relates to excessive hunger because your body is not able to store the extra glucose because it is just leaving through your kidneys. So then you don't have stored like ATP or like sugar in your body cells or in your liver. And so when your body needs to do cellular respiration, it doesn't have enough glucose, sugar on hold to be able to do that properly. So people are also commonly tired. Some other leading up to the diagnosis, patients will experience heavy breathing or like a metallic kind of fruity smell, and those both just kind of relate to the high pH level in your blood and the high levels of glucose. So predicting the probability, today there are many different tests that you can have that inform a patient on will they, like the chances that they will or could develop a certain disease or disorder. There are two main ones. Many people can use a Punnett square or also a family pedigree. So in this first one, we have an example of an autosomal dominant. So as it shows right here, you have the two parents who have the trait, and then 2 out of their 3 children get the trait. So in this, a capital letter, no matter if you have like one big letter and one little letter, the trait will still show through. So this third child obviously has 2 little letters because they do not show the trait. So you can kind of use this pedigree over here, and it kind of explains where the dad has a big B, little b, but has brown eyes, and the mom also has a big B and little b, brown eyes. So any square with a big B, their child will have brown eyes because it is the dominant gene. But 1/4 of their children will have the possibility of having blue eyes because they have one little b and one little b, and that is a recessive, homozygous recessive trait. So practice problem in the realm of diabetes, if you have, so again with the big D, you have a normal non-diabetic. You have one big D, one little d, you're still a non-diabetic. But people with 2 little d's are diabetic. So if you have a mom who has a big D and little d, and a father who has a big D, little d, neither of them have diabetes, but they're both carriers for it. So that shows that 1/4 of their children have the odds of becoming a diabetic, while 1/2 of their children have the odds of not being diabetic but being a carrier, while only 1/4 of their children will not be diabetic and not be a carrier. Some real world probability, they found statistically that in general, if you're a male with type 1 diabetes, the odds of you developing diabetes is 1 in 17. If you're a woman with type 1 diabetes and your child was born before you were 25, your child has a 1 in 25 risk. However, if your child was born after you were 25, your child has a 1 in 100 risk. Your child risk, however, is doubled if you developed diabetes before the age of 11. And that is kind of the thing with most people with type 1 diabetes are diagnosed at an early age in their life. However, there are some people who are diagnosed later in life, in the teenage to college years. And then your risk increases if your partner also has type 1 diabetes. So researchers are learning how to predict a person's odds of getting diabetes by also using genes. They have gene markers as the HLA-DR3 or DR4, and they have proven that if you have either of these two genetic markers, that your children will be more predisposed or more likely to develop diabetes. That is the end of today's video, and I hope you learned a little bit more about genetics and its relation to diseases and disorders today. Thank you.